There was a guy who had a 2004 Competition Orange Mach 1 Mustang, and he really liked this car. Deep down, he always wanted a Terminator, but he made the Mach 1 do. He even Terminator swapped it. He put a lot of work and money into this car, but he just said that no matter what, he just kept wanting a Terminator, especially a Competition Orange Terminator. So he got looking around, and eventually he found that somebody was selling one. But the car they were selling was very different than just going and picking one up. This car had quite an interesting story. He had heard that somebody had built a 2004 Competition Orange Terminator Cobra, that they had put a ton of money into it. They turned the car into a turbo car, and they blew it up on the dyno without even a chance of racing it with all the new modifications. And what they had done is they parted that car out and stuffed it in a storage unit. And he was able to meet up with the owner, and this is what the car looked like after sitting for so long. The car was absolutely filthy. It was dusty. It had massive drag radials on the back. As a matter of fact, when he went to get the car, it didn't have an axle in it. It didn't have a K-member. It was completely parted out. He had to get a junkyard 8.8 axle with 327 gears and take it to the car and install it just to get the car out of there to be able to roll it out. I think it's interesting that if you look over, you will see a brand new Boss 302. I assume this is the owner of the Terminator who just went and bought a new car. This was in 2012, so that Boss 302 was brand new. Looking inside the car, you'll notice it has a roll cage, no seats, because the guy had been parting the car out. Interestingly enough, it still has the stock radio, it has the shift boot, the leather Terminator shift boot, the Terminator steering wheel, and over here on the floor is a Terminator shift knob, you can see. In the back, here's a better look at the roll bar, and you can see there's the transmission boot and bezel ring and some empty boxes in the back. You can see that the car is just real dirty from sitting so long, that it has a cowl hood on it, that it has spare tires on the front. The guy had just been parting out anything he could on this car to get all the money that he had spent on it without even getting to race it down the track, because from what I understand it blew up on the dyno. You can see though that the front lip is a little bit mangled there. The car had about 60,000 miles on it, and so it was still a nice car, and I don't think a lot of people had ever seen a Terminator in this kind of condition sitting like that. And I really liked seeing the car like this. I mean, not that I enjoy seeing a car run down like this, but I think it's really interesting that the car had been shoved away like that. I like watching barn find videos. I'm interested in stories like this. I watch other people's stories on YouTube where they go around and they find these cars that have been sitting, and it has a really interesting feel to it to see a car that's been put away and hiding. So I really like seeing barn find videos, or videos on YouTube and pictures. So I thought this was really cool. This is a Terminator barn find. And so he struck up a deal with the seller, and he trailered the car home, and there it is next to his Comp Orange Mach 1. I believe he would swap the front bumpers from these cars. I think that's what ended up happening. I can't quite remember the details, because this one, you'll see in the pictures on the Cobra, was broken and kind of hanging a little bit. But he started to clean the car up, gave it a good wash, and he said he was really surprised at how nice the car cleaned up. It was, like I said, a 60,000 mile car. It wasn't in too bad a shape. It had rock chips and things on it, but overall the car cleaned up nicely. He put some saline wheels on it and just started working on it. Now, he said he spent $40,000 putting this car back together. A real interesting part to the story was the new engine he picked up for the car. He had talked to somebody selling one, and they said that they knew that the engine had at least less than 50,000 miles on it. So he went over and bought the engine from them, and said when he got it home, he took off the valve covers and things because he was going to put different ones on, and he was draining the oil and everything, and found out that it still had the break-in oil in it, that the engine was a brand new crate engine. So he thought that the engine was absolutely brand new. So then he added a Kenny Bell supercharger and all the supporting mods. You can see a nice painted elbow for the supercharger in this picture, and a pair of those hood vents. Those are really nice aftermarket ones that a lot of people went with. So we got the car all back together, running and everything, took it to HPP Racing for a dyno tune. And HPP Racing is one of those Terminator places for me. I've seen videos. There's a really popular one that I'll be doing a story about called The Evolution of My '03 Cobra. And that's where they took that Terminator to have it dyno tuned by a guy named Manny there, who's really good with these cars. The car put down 680 horsepower and 676 foot-pounds of torque on E85, which is basically a race fuel. For those of you who don't know, E85 can be run with a lot of timing, and it's like a race fuel. So as far as the mods go on this car, when he was all done with it, it had the Ford Racing crate engine with 5,000 miles on it. He had revised 9-thread heads, the Kenny Bell 2.2 liter, which was a low-mile supercharger, AccuFab single-blade throttle body, billet flow 4-piece idlers that were polished, billet flow hub and 3.0 supercharger pulley, SCT BA3000 mass air meter, the handheld SCT X3, the JLT high boost intake, powder coated orange valve covers and pulley bridge, black timing cover, Terminator coil covers, Terminator radiator shroud, Moroso intercooler tanks, Moroso coolant reservoir, Metco interchangeable lower pulley kit, Metco 6-pound lower, Metco 3.5 alternator pulley, dual pass heat exchanger by LFP, and the exhaust was Cook's long tube headers, Ford Racing header bolts, Cook's off-road X pipe with boreless Stinger catback. It had a D&D built T56 because remember it didn't have a transmission or anything in it when he bought it. He bought a Pro 5.0 short throw shifter, 26 spline input shaft, spec stage 3 clutch, spec lightweight billet flywheel, and remember that the rear end on the car was an 8.8 axle out of a solid axle car like a GT. So he had to go in there and put 31 spline axles, Detroit locker, C-clip eliminators, still kept the 327 gears, welded the tubes on the axle, welded front stabilizer bars, and a GT500 diff cover. The suspension on the car was Team Z tubular K member, Team Z control arms, energy suspension poly motor and trans mounts, UPR coilovers, it's the Steeda bump steer kit, UPR caster camber plates, Takiko adjustable struts in the rear, H&R springs, the Super Race rear lowering springs, Maximum Motorsports lower control arms in the rear, J&M upper control arms, full-length subframe connectors that were welded in. And for the fuel system, he had 80-pound injectors, Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator, steel braided -10 feed lines, steel braided -8 return lines, factory fuel tank, because the Terminator tank is already sumped. And it's a really good design. It keeps the car from dry sumping. I bought one for my Bullet when I supercharged it. It puts the pumps down low in the bottom of the tank where they get fuel all the time, and so it's a good tank. So he still had that tank. He added the fuel pumps, the fuel rails, and the PPRV delete, which is a little valve. It's like a check valve that's in the fuel lines right after the pumps, and it keeps gas from draining back into the tank when the car shut off, so it keeps fuel to the fuel rails for an easier startup. But a lot of people delete that valve because if you're racing and you do a shift, a really high RPM shift, sometimes that valve gets checked and then fuel gets caught, like air pockets get caught in the fuel lines, and it makes the car kind of fall on its face for a minute. So I deleted the PPRV out of the tank I bought when I did the Bullet too. So it's a common modification. So he had that done to it. Now the interior is interesting. If you notice, it has Terminator seats back in it, but if you remember, the car didn't have any seats in it. So he had to get some Terminator seats and have them recovered by TMI, which is a good upholstery company that sells aftermarket seats for these cars, the covers and the cushions, the foam, everything. And I believe TMI was actually the original supplier for Ford for these seats. But anyway, if you look on the seats, the one thing about them is they do not have the Cobra snake on them anymore. I don't think TMI is allowed to put those in there, or for whatever reason TMI doesn't put the Cobra on there. There you can see the roll bar that's in there. I don't know if it was powder coated or just painted that way. It looks like it's powder coated roll bar. And then he had the Speed Hut fuel pressure gauge with the SVT logo on it. Looks good, it matches the other gauges. And a custom painted comp orange shift ball. Those hood vents that we had talked about are actually True Forged is the brand. They're black anodized hood vents. He had, as far as just other things that the car had, and some of these things you'll realize he just had to buy because the car didn't have them anymore. Shorty antenna, aftermarket clear reflector headlights, 55 watt HIDs and fog lights, tinted tail lights, Cobra grill emblem, black SVT Terminator trunk badge, tinted windows, drilled and slotted rotors, orange painted calipers, GT rear brake conversion. Usually you put that on so that you can fit smaller brakes on it, smaller discs, and then put a bigger tire on the back if you're going to be racing it. It has the billet AC knobs, and those I saw in the original picture of it when he got it from the barn or from the garage or wherever the car was. He put mini valve cover breathers on it and vinyl Cobra bumper inserts. So all those things are things that he had to just go buy and put on the car, and there's a lot of money involved. Eventually he ended up selling the car, and when I say eventually, it really wasn't very long after he did all this. Supposedly about 4 months after he finished the car, he decided that he'd sell it because he needed to buy a house. And so his friend ended up buying it with about 62,000 miles on it, and his friend put 1,000 miles on the car, and that's when I saw the car for sale on SVT Performance. And these are the pictures I saw of the car when it was listed for sale. It has those Mach 5 wheels on it. The car has had several different wheels on it you've seen during these pictures that we've been showing here. And but anyway, I saw it like this. He wanted a lot for the car per se. I mean, he wanted like 26,000. That's pretty high for a car that has that many miles on it, and especially one that has a cage in it and that's been, you know, heavily modified. Some people want all those things. At the time, I was just noticing the car for the first time. I had no idea the history of this car, and I had commented on the post and said that I had some interest. I was looking for a competition orange. I'm very happy that I got mine instead. Mine is basically stock with only a short shifter and exhaust on it. I'm very happy that I got one that was so clean and preserved. But anyway, this car was nice, but I think it's gone through a lot. And you can see he has a Terminator hood back on it, which is interesting because in the ad it says that it had all the original paint. But I don't really see how it can have all the original paint if it didn't come with a Terminator hood on it. But anyway, these are some of the pictures that were in a magazine when the car was featured. And you can see this is when he still owned it. The guy who built it, you know, that bow down Texas license plate on it. But anyway, these are the pictures that were in the magazine, and it talked all about how he really loved the car, and he put 40,000 into it, had to put it all back together, and how he came about getting the car. So it is a very interesting story. Now, he started to feel bad about selling it, even to his friend, and so once he was in his new house and everything, he decided, you know, I'm going to try to get that car back. So he talked to his friend and asked him, what happened to the car? I want to get it back, because he knew he sold it to a friend and the friend had sold it. And so the friend gave him the contact information to the guy who bought it, and it turns out the guy was a broker who bought the car and sold it to somebody in Europe. So there's really no getting this car back for him. I mean, I know when you ship a car overseas, it's really expensive. I've heard up to $10,000 to ship a car overseas. And in this case, I think it'd be real difficult getting it back from someone who had the car shipped over there. So anyway, this is a very interesting story. It's a car that I considered buying at one point. It's had a pretty big history. With 60,000 miles on it before the car blew up and everything, I'm sure this car lived a very hard life, especially if the first owner or whoever had it before had turned it into a turbo car, because that shows that they probably did so much with it supercharged that they decided that they needed more power and went turbo. As far as I'm concerned, when I look at cars like this, if I'm going to buy one that has a lot of power through it and a lot of race history, the things I start worrying about are the structural parts, like by the axle, the part where the axle bolts to the chassis, the torque boxes. A lot of times those start to tear and people have really ripped these cars apart. So I'd be real cautious buying a car like this that had so much power put through it. And he had said that when he put it back together, he had a hard time finding the oddest little tiny things, little nuts and bolts and things that were really hard to get. And so I know this guy had put a lot into this car. So anyway, cool story about a 2004 competition orange Terminator Cobra. I hope you enjoyed the story. And please subscribe to the channel if you're not on here with us. And thanks for watching.